Good morning. Yesterday, the Bermuda government commenced legal proceedings intended to place the assets at Caroline Bay under the control of provisional liquidators. The developers acknowledged in February of 2018 that they were unable to pay their debts. While the government has done everything prudently possible to support efforts to refinance the project, to date, the developers have failed to provide an acceptable way forward. 2 years have elapsed since the developers' notification of their inability to pay their debts, and we have diligently reviewed each proposal that they have put forward. Without exception, each proposal would have put the Bermuda government in a far worse position than it is in today. We have always been of the view that new borrowing in priority to our existing claims and based on speculative plans would likely mean further default. The new lender would have recourse to the assets we seek to claim today, which would leave the people of Bermuda with nothing. We saw this as the greatest risk to the project and an outcome we could not tolerate. In addition, each of the various proposals has been based on the Bermuda government retaining its $165 million guarantee or increasing it to $185 million. They are also based on the payment of transaction fees to the developers or parties related to them in the range of $12.5 to $17.5 million, and repayment of loans or interest payments on loans to other lenders who were not part of the Bermuda government guarantee. Our responsibility is to the people of Bermuda, and we deemed each of those proposals wholly unacceptable. Proceedings yesterday saw the appointment of senior members of Ernst & Young Bermuda as joint provisional liquidators, who will take control of the various project companies representing the collateral behind the original project loans and the Bermuda government guarantees. Joint provisional liquidators are independent and accountable to the court. It is their responsibility to review the financial condition of the project companies to determine where additional liabilities may rest, and to gain as much value as possible to satisfy the Bermuda government's claims. As has been expressed previously, the government intends to protect the interest of the people of Bermuda to the fullest extent possible under the law. The Bermuda government is retaining the services of global firm Alvarez & Marcel, who are expert restructuring advisors. They have significant experience in projects such as this one, where developers are unable to pay their debts and have partially constructed buildings in support of lenders' claims. We have asked them to work with our advisory team to prepare options for the various existing buildings and the wider project, including an emergency remediation plan to protect what has already been invested. In due course, this could extend to a design construction plan which would allow us to complete the buildings and have them in working order should we deem that the most suitable way forward. Funding for this stage of the project is being financed within the existing $200 million credit facility provided by Butterfield Bank and HSBC Bank Bermuda, and it should be noted that the direct Bermuda government borrowing will be limited to that amount. Any future borrowing would have to be done through a new special purpose vehicle backed by the assets of the project itself. This leaves open the option that the Bermuda government may seek additional investors or co-investors if deemed appropriate. The intention is to ensure that the people of Bermuda get the greatest return on the funds that have been expended on this project thus far. We are disappointed that the developers failed in what was the largest Bermuda government-backed hospitality project, and notwithstanding the two years since notification of their inability to pay debts, were unable to provide any viable way forward. We recognize, however, that our primary responsibility at this stage is to address the Bermuda government's financial exposure by seeking to place the control of the assets with the provisional liquidators through the courts. We hope to find a sensible way to potentially finance and complete what is already partially built, and then to seek the best option for return of funds expended. This could have and should have been avoided. Governments should not take on the majority of the financial risk for a project and leave the execution, operation, and financial upside to a counterparty. The people of Bermuda should never be exposed to that kind of deal. The public can be assured that we are committed to doing everything possible to bring this matter to a sensible conclusion, and we will remain fully engaged in this project until this objective is met. Thank you.
Gary?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Gary.
You said that the developers failed to provide any way forward. You said the developers failed to provide an acceptable way forward. Did they provide any way forward at all?
We've been talking with the developers over the course of the last several months, Gary, and they have submitted to us at least 2 to 3 proposals on a way forward. We've spent time working with them and their teams to assess those proposals and deemed them to be unacceptable.
Are you able to elaborate why those proposals were unacceptable?
Sure, I can give you some color, Gary. In one instance, it would have required that the debt that we currently hold be subordinated to a new investor, and that investor would have a priority claim on the assets. There was a proposal put in place where someone would buy the debt from us but retain the guarantees, and so what we have today is, as the debt holders, we have the benefit of the security, the assets that are pledged to the tranche B loans. Inasmuch as we would have sold those loans to someone else, the guarantees would have remained in place. Had the project defaulted again, the government would have been on the hook for $165, $170 million and had no assets for which it could go after to sell in the event they want to raise monies to pay back monies that we borrowed.
Thank you. From your point of view, what is the best and worst case scenario in this situation?
Well, I would say that the best case scenario is that we get all of our money back. The worst case scenario is that we lose all of our money. We've taken the actions that we've taken yesterday in an effort to mitigate the worst case outcome. And so we will take, through the provisional liquidators, control of the assets and work to figure out a way to restructure the project in a way that makes the most sense and heightens the chance of us getting repaid.
And my final question is, from the point of view of contractors, right now, will they still get compensation, or are there disruptions related to COVID-19 right now?
Well, Gary, you will recall that we, in December of last year and January of this year, paid about $11 million in claims to contractors. We have seen a trickle of smaller amounts come in subsequent to those payments. And so to the best of my knowledge, the contractors who've worked on the phase of the project, phase 1A, that relates to our guarantees, have by and large been paid.
Thank you, Minister.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do I need to hold the microphone?
It's been.
Good morning, Minister. Yeah, I guess some questions in no particular order, but you mentioned that you've been meeting with the developers in recent months, and without calling any names, I mean, they have a reputation as being deep-pocketed. I think a lot of people would be wondering why they, or how they're not able to finance this themselves. Maybe if you could walk us through a bit of the economics of that. But yeah, I mean, one in particular has a reputation as being extremely wealthy. So some people have asked why they are unable to pay for it themselves.
Jonathan, I think that's a question that's probably best addressed to the developers. How much money they put in at this point and why they aren't able to fund additional amounts personally is a question that I think they are best positioned to answer.
Right, sir. Can you speak to any of the restructuring options? Obviously, it's early days, but what we could potentially see with this, if it'll still go ahead as a hospitality development, if it'll become housing.
One of the things that I've been very careful about as I've worked through kind of the challenges of this particular piece of my portfolio is not to get ahead of myself. What I've also sought to do is put in place a very good process of taking good advice from good advisors. What we've done here is we're going to retain Alvarez and Marcel, who are experts in the real estate space, in the restructuring space, to give us some advice on what they think are the best options going forward. Additionally, the Joint Provisional Liquidators, EY, have a bunch of experience having done work in hospitality properties. I think they were involved in both Newstead and Tucker's Point.
Yes.
And so we're going to take some advice. We're going to give our advisors the opportunity to kind of do a proper assessment of the situation. The first step in moving this project forward was yesterday's court process to have the Joint Provisional Liquidators appointed, and then working with them to find what they think is the best way forward, to provide us with a range of options that we can then decide how we want to move forward.
I guess what's next for Caroline Bay, sir?
Well, I mentioned earlier that there's, we talked about remediation. There are a number of buildings on the site that are partially complete. Those buildings have not been worked on for a couple of months, several months. We are in Bermuda. We know the harsh impact that the environment, the sun, and the salt can have on buildings. And so what I said before is we will put in place a remediation plan to go and look at those structures and do any work that needed to shore up those buildings in an effort to preserve the value that has been invested in, the monies that have been invested in those buildings to date.
And so I guess in terms of reclaiming our money, which you've said several times is what you expect to do with this, how do we best go about getting our money back for Caroline Bay, please?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is the buildings that have been partially constructed, we need to finish them first. I mean, our chances of kind of recovery of all of our money are reduced in as much as there's incomplete construction that's done.
Yes.
And so we need to figure out, one, how to stabilize the situation with respect to the existing buildings, even finish some of the partially constructed condominiums, and then with the help of our advisors, figure out how do we move forward from there. I also spoke about capping the government's financial exposure at $200 million. And then there was lots of questions when I announced increasing of the debt ceiling some time back for the contemplation of this $200 million facility around Morgan's Point. And there were lots of questions around why 200 if the guarantee was only 165. Part of the reason for the 200 was we were trying to build in some contingencies. 2, there were other claims from local contractors. 3, I have advisors that need to be compensated for the work that's being provided. And 4, the eventuality of us kind of having to take possession through the Joint Provisional Liquidators of the asset and doing some remediation work to ensure that the assets do not continue to depreciate in value.
And has remediation work completely finished at the site, do you know, sir?
Well, we haven't started,
John. No, I mean in terms of the cleanup.
To the best of my knowledge, I think that work had been done.
Right. Well, thanks for your time, Minister.
You're welcome.